You have to hear the word no so many times and realize that no just means let me ask it a different way, or no just means let me try to explain it in a different way, you know?
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenny Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Elisa Teipel, an engineer and entrepreneur who shares with us the things she wished she knew before becoming an entrepreneur. And she is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Dr. Elisa Teipel, welcome to Latinx Can.
Thank you for having me. Gracias por tenerme contigo.
I'm excited about this conversation today. I think we're going to have a lot of interesting information to share with the audience. But let's first start by talking a little bit about you and where your story begins.
Yeah, so my story is I grew up in Colorado. My family, though, is from El Salvador, Central America. And my parents both grew up there, went to school there, and started their college careers there, and then moved to the States where I was born. My mother, she is also an engineer, background engineer, and my father went to law school. And I started, entrepreneurship at the age of 7. My inspiration for entrepreneurship was one of my grandmothers, my paternal grandmother. She was a school teacher, but on the side, she had a lot of little businesses that she would run and support. And so I really got to know about entrepreneurship through her to start with. And then my maternal grandmother also, she was a nurse, and now a retired nurse, and she would also do little side things, to help ends meet and stuff. And so I really got to see from an early age how entrepreneurship was a way of life, just in general, and how you could sell and use and buy things that could help others from an early age.
It's amazing that your examples are both female, right? Like both your grandmas really taken into, I think I also see that as well from my mom. It's like my mom, when I grew up, she still worked a full-time career and she had 3 kids, right? And so like I saw her just, balancing everything seamlessly, but I know it takes a lot of work, but it's so powerful when you have those female role models that showcase and show you what you can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that they showed you that like from an early age, and it's possible to do something. The joke was I was 7 years old and I started painting rocks that I found at the park or on the playground. I would take them home, I would clean them, and then I would paint them and then sell them to friends. And which is so funny to think but I saw something that people wanted, maybe needed or wanted, and then saying, what could I do to provide that? And so I think that is something that I learned from, my grandmothers, my mother, and I can really relate with what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you grew up practicing sports and having an athletic career, one that eventually took you to the Olympic trials for Taekwondo in 2004. What was it like for you to pursue your education while being an athlete?
That's a great question. So for me, I think growing up, I was in different kind of sports, but Taekwondo was definitely my main sport. I also started that when I was 7. So it was always part of just a way of life. Go to school, after school, do your sports, do Taekwondo, go to Taekwondo. And growing up, what it allowed me to do was have a lot of discipline. I didn't know it at the time, but now I see there was a lot of discipline in that specific sport, but just in general, any sport. I really saw that it really made me prioritize time with friends, time with family, very little time to waste. It also really helped me to keep focused. So because I knew that I was trying to go through school and do sports at the same time, it really made it to where I had no time to waste. Everything was planned. Everything was scheduled out, and it created a good discipline. It was hard, but it created a good discipline. I think that, sometimes athletes, especially when it comes to the Olympics, people might step away from school or from work to focus only on training. In my instance, I really felt that I wanted to stay in school still. And so that made it hard. That made it for really long days. Mm-hmm. But it did help build tenacity, resilience, and discipline. And in that regard, it was very much like being, a collegiate athlete. I know, I think you did sports as well in college. And so I think you can relate with that and how it builds that discipline. And it also provides like opportunities and just opens up doors that because you're doing both at the same time, you might not have if you didn't do them both at the same time.
Yeah, I can totally relate with the discipline. And I think for me, if I were to look at a trait that makes a difference for, the type of life that I live now and my accomplishment, I think it would be discipline, because it's not necessarily that I'm much better than anybody else. Like, I have talents. You can use your talents, but if you don't train and develop your talents, then they're just going to be raw, always raw. Yeah. But if you put in the work and you put in the discipline that it takes to really develop something, that's where things blossom.
Yeah.
And so, you mentioned you were focused on your education as well as on your athletic career. And this led you to pursue your bachelor's degree in engineering at Colorado State University. How do you decide to become an engineer?
Yeah, so the journey to become an engineer, I think I probably actually fought it more than I should have. My mom being an engineer, I remember being in, high school trying to figure out what am I going to be? And I really thought that I wanted to be a medical doctor for a long time. I really loved helping people. And so I thought, oh, this would be great. I could help people. And I thought it would be really a fun way to do, to have a career doing that. But being that my mom is an engineer, I almost fought it. Like, I don't want to do engineering because it was almost like a given. You should do engineering. And so I was kind of like, okay, well, we'll see. So I kind of put it off actually for a little bit. I kept hearing, oh, you're good at math and science. You should be an engineer. And it's like, I think it doesn't sound cool. Like, when you're in high school or junior high, it doesn't. Instead, I feel like you should be asked, are you a good problem solver? Do you like helping people? Because math and science are important, but that wasn't what's sparking kids, and I think we could, I'll talk more about that probably later, but anyway, what helped me decide to become an engineer was actually the outreach of a professor at CSU at the time. He was the department head of mechanical engineering department, Dr. Tong, I believe is his name. And he was there and he wrote me a letter. Basically, he had seen a sports article in the local newspaper that was talking about some sports accomplishments I had. And he said, have you considered, engineering, and have you considered CSU? And I was like, no, not really. And so just getting to meet him and learning more. And I think just being connected to someone that could show me it's not just math and science, like it's applied math and science that you can help so many. And that really turned me on to want to study engineering. And then meeting so many great professors at CSU and beyond that really kept me engaged for all the years to come.
And so you mentioned then that to help motivate kids to follow engineering, maybe we don't always have to focus on the math and science skills, but more on creativity. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so math and science are super important. And I think but they can be very almost like they can keep people out of the profession because they think they have to be so good at it. And while I think, yes, you have to learn them, I think it's a misnomer that you have to be so good at it. You really have to be well-rounded, I think. And in some areas, I think there are types of engineering where certain math or science skills are more prevalent, but overall, I think just it's that well-roundedness that being able to think critically, problem solve, work on a team, look at problem solving from different angles. I think the math and science are just tools for that, and they're tools in the toolbox, but they're not what define a good engineer or define a good scientist. Holistically, an engineer really does need to be good at math and science, but it's just more than that. It's not just that.
You mentioned I also did like college sports, and as athletes, we also benefited from a number of scholarships that made our education affordable, if not free. I mean, I know that the scholarships that were available when you and I went to college may not be available right now, but do you have any tips of where or how to look for scholarships that can help lower the burden of college tuition?
And I'll say I'm not as up to date right now on what is or isn't available, but I will say that overall, I know that there's still some good scholarships out there. I really think that with scholarships, you really have to be diligent, and you have to realize that nobody is going to come out and just say, here are 10 scholarships. You have to be on a journey to find them and to look for them. And I think it's in that pursuit and that resiliency that you find them, that you overcome, that you actually end up writing the good essays and making the good connections to be chosen for the scholarships, because you see how hard you have to work to get them. And so I really do think that you have to be very proactive. You have to go meet with your, if you're in high school still, meet with guidance counselors, be bold and proactive, go to the universities that you're interested in, find out about financial aid and what scholarships are available. Especially if you're, Latino, you can go in there and look and meet with different groups at the universities and find out what scholarships are available that you might qualify for. So I think really being proactive and resilient to go out and find and search, and not just say, well, I can't find anything, or I didn't see anything, or I didn't know. I think those are going to hinder you if you take a stance of saying, well, I'm going to find a way. I'm a firm believer of where there is a will, there is a way in most anything in life. Sometimes, it doesn't work out that way, but really for me, at least what I've seen is if there's a will, there's a way to make it happen, and it might look different than what you originally thought, but there's a way. I think athletics, there are some merit-based for athletics. I think there are some ways to do that. I mean, also working. I had to work some in college just to keep up with some expenses and be debt-free, to graduate debt-free.
Yeah, I think those are great. And I think your point to really being proactive and just trying, right? The more essays you write, the better you get at it, the more efficient you will be when the right scholarship comes in front of you. And I actually just heard from a friend who just got accepted into an MBA program, and he was talking to the admissions department to see what tips they could recommend. And, 50% of the MBA program would be paid by the company that he works for. And so he was still responsible for 50%. And in that, he said, maybe let me ask them and see if they have any scholarships available. And they said, well, I mean, this is an MBA program, so most of the time there aren't many, but we do have very, very few scholarships for, outstanding applications. And so that was information that he got ahead of time. And then he said, well, I'm going to focus on having a very creative application and see if I can get a scholarship like that. And he got $5,000, So those are $5,000 less that he has to put out of his pocket.
Totally. Absolutely. No, that's a great example. And I forgot to mention that, but you're right. Companies, often will have something, or at least it's worth checking.
You got your bachelor's, right, in engineering, and you didn't stop there. You went on to pursue a master's degree from Baylor University in mechanical and materials engineering, and eventually a PhD in civil engineering from the University of Colorado, Boulder. Did you always know that you wanted to pursue a PhD?
It's a good question. So I don't think I knew what a PhD was till I was I think I was like sixth grade, maybe. I finally started to understand that there was different types of college and the different levels. But for some reason, when I think all of us have this desire when we're little kids to be an astronaut. And so I started researching in fifth and sixth grade, like, what does it take to be an astronaut? And I saw that a lot of the astronauts had like, PhDs. And so I was like, oh, that's what I need. I need a PhD. And I want a PhD in astrophysics. And in my sixth grade yearbook, like who remembers sixth grade yearbooks? But when I was moving houses, I had this little paper book and it said, I want to be an astrophysics. I want a PhD in astrophysics when I grow up. And I was 11, I'm like, how did I know what that means? But I think it's just from reading those biographies and reading like so surrounding myself with like that desire. I want to be, like these people. So that was my first notion of it. But growing up from that age on, I think I just, like I said, I didn't really know I wanted to do engineering until finally I went to college. And then there came a point right towards the end of senior year of college where it was like, start trying to apply to medical schools or work or do more engineering. And at the time, I actually started really loving engineering, really understanding that I could, and actually a dear family friend of mine, of ours, he's a physician, and I shadowed him many times, and I really thought I wanted to do medicine. And he had gone engineering and then turned into a family medicine doctor after. And so I was thinking, okay, engineering, I want to do the same thing? I want to be a doctor. But I remember him saying something to me. He's like, I don't discourage you from being a medical doctor, but I can only help X many patients a day. With an engineering degree, if you stick it through, you could help so many people a day just by something that you make or something that you do. And I was just like, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. So that combined with, really great advisors at CSU, Colorado State University.
Yeah.
I had a great advisor there, Brian Wilson. He was showing me all that I could do with my engineering degree. I could help others. I could build clean burning cook stoves. I could look at and solve materials problems. I started to see that, maybe I should give engineering one more chance. So I was introduced to Walter Bradley at Baylor University. And that really opened my eyes to see how I could use my engineering to help others at the next level. So I decided to do my master's at that point. And that opened up just a love for engineering that I've never looked back. I still like medicine, but I've never looked back. And I from then went on to get my PhD at CU Boulder and worked with another great professor there, Bernard Amadei, and really just forged around these interestingly enough, they're all men, but they're all men that really believed in me. And there was I guess there's a female professor too at CSU, Dr. Al-Hakim. She really pushed me to like, do research, go try research projects. And so I feel like all of them together, and then some connections out on the East Coast really showed me that engineering, you could really help people with an engineering degree. And so that's how I continued my education.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point of view in that sometimes with medicine, you are a little limited to however many patients you see in a day. I never looked at it that way. Mm-hmm. I'm reminded right now, the hurricane just went through Louisiana and they were talking on this podcast I listened to about how 16 years after Katrina, they really fortified the levees around the city so that they could prevent a disaster as bad as Katrina was. And for whatever reason, the storm might have been different, but the engineering work that they did really, really helped keep the city from flooding terribly this time around in a Category 5 hurricane. And so I think it's a good example of how, as an engineer, you really can make a huge difference in the life of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you said that you became an entrepreneur when you were 7 years old. And then after you completed your college education and your PhD, or maybe even while you were studying your master's and your PhD, that title became official when you found Whole Tree. So tell us about how that startup was born and how it evolved into what we know now as Ascentium.
So when I was in my master's program at Baylor, Dr. Walter Bradley, he had been at A&M. He was department chair at A&M for many years, and he had been called out of retirement really to help Baylor start a world-class research master's and PhD program. at Baylor. And so he was very interested in using engineering and doing sustainable community development. And so a friend of mine, fellow grad student, Stanton Greer, and I worked with Dr. Bradley to come up with this idea on what if you took something that was waste somewhere, a waste material, and added value to it and made it an engineering grade material that could then be sold and help in the communities. And so we repurposed waste from the coconut industry into materials for particle board and polymeric composites, so like polyolefins. And we founded this company, Whole Tree. Whole Tree was founded in 2008, and we really had traction with the automotive industry and making and the building construction industry and making natural materials out of coconuts. Now, interestingly enough, that company turned into natural composites, and we had a great run from 2008 to about 2013. But in 2013, that company was winding down. And as one thing leads to another, and I think something that's so key in the startup world is you will hit many dead ends sometimes, and you will need to pivot. You will try something and you'll need to try something again and try it differently. And if you look at any successful entrepreneur, they'll have many failed startups and many successful startups after that. You know, sometimes the end of one is the beginning of something new. And that's how it was with us in this case. So Whole Tree Natural Composites came to a close, but a couple of us that worked together at Natural Composites really still enjoyed working together. And so we worked with one of the investors from that previous company, and Gene Birdwell, and we were able to put together a plan, a pitch to say, well, what if we do focus on materials and focus on engineering materials that could change the world? You know, materials are the building blocks of the world. So what could we do with our material science background, pivot from what we were doing, but really focus on materials? And so that was the foundation in 2013 of Ascentium Inc. And it was one of those things where you realize, like, wow, it's so hard, but it's so good. You know, it really is one of those things where, though it was something hard, we knew it was the right thing to do, to try something new. And I'm glad that we did, because now we're focused on completely different. You know, we don't forget our roots. I think for me, you always think about the things you've tried and done. And we forged some great friendships, and some great companies are still going and doing the coconut work, which is great. And we are now focused more on the engineering side of things, engineering composite materials, but still being able to, you know, keep in touch with everyone. So I think that was really, you know, how we started Ascentium Materials. That really was in some ways a new start, but in some ways it was just a learning from the last thing we were doing, you know. And I think that's life. It's journey. The journey is like learning little things and building on the base that you have.
If I'm following the story, I see the connection between maybe like the composites with the waste material from the coconut industry, and then making, you know, materials, right? But then you also applied it into 3D printing, which at the time was, I guess, 2013. It was still pretty new. It hadn't really gained that much. And I'll tell you a story, and I don't know if I've told you already. My husband also works in the 3D printing industry, and I was in Orlando walking the Rapid show. And remember that year, HP was unveiling their own printers. And I'm walking the floor, and then I just stumbled across this person who on his badge said Ascentium Inc. or Ascentium Materials, College Station, Texas. And I was like, wait, who are you guys? I live in College Station, right? And they told me about Ascentium. And then not only that year you guys won against HP for, I guess, the best printer or something like that, right? Yeah. Tell us how that connection happened.
Yeah, that's actually great. So, okay, that's a great recap. So from 2013 to about 2015, we went on this journey to find out, okay, we're all really focused on materials and building the next generation of materials, but what can we do? What are the like the hot technologies right now? You know, I think as an entrepreneur, you're always looking for what is your next play in the playbook. And you look at it and you realize, okay, I have a materials background, a material science engineering background. what could we make? And we just saw additive was just really, additive manufacturing, 3D printing has been around for 20 plus years, but it's really starting to pick up in 2013, 14, and beyond. And then in 2015, 2016, we really made that pivot to say, we actually need to do materials in 3D printing. Like there is a need for filament in 3D printing. And so it was one of those things where we realized we didn't know everything about the industry, but we knew enough to get started. We knew that we had a machine to make filament. We knew that we had the technical know-how for how to process plastics. Mm-hmm. And so we started making material and talking to customers and finding out what were the needs, what were some of the pain points. And while we did that, we were like, okay, we can do this. We can, instead of making little plastic pellets like we were doing in our previous jobs, we can actually just make a strand, mm-hmm. and that strand can be sold for 3D printing. And so we started investigating what are the types of materials, what is most out there. At that point, we started working with a grad student, one of the other co-founders, grad student that had a lot of knowledge in 3D printing. And so we really were able to come together as a group and say, okay, let's do this. And from the material side then stemmed the reality that the material is important, but you need a good tool to use the material in. And we saw great desktop options, but we had not yet seen a really compelling industrial grade 3D printer that we could solely endorse and say, okay, we're going to put our materials on that machine. Mm. So we got together with some other friends. Blake knew some other friends in the industry. And we came together to create Ascentium Inc., bringing the machines and the materials together and making an industrial scale 3D printer that could be really the machine, the tool to put all these materials into. So that's how we came to seeing that there was this need for an A to Z materials, all the way to the printer platform to then be able to print parts actually that are functionally usable for customers. So that's how we got into that.
That's really interesting. I guess you've been an entrepreneur for about a decade, and I'm sure it has been challenging. What are some of the things that you wish you knew about entrepreneurship when you first started and that you can share with our audience now?
I was on an NSF panel, National Science Foundation panel last week or so. And the same question was asked. And I was like, that really it's a key question, because I think with entrepreneurship, if I would have known when I first started that it was going to be this hard, I would have still done it. But I think I would have probably prepared a little differently. There's a really high cost to being an entrepreneur. I think there's a lot of glamour in it. My best friend jokes, she tells me often, she says, oh, you're so lucky you work for yourself. Like you started a business, a company, and you're a co-founder, and you're so lucky you get to put your own hours and stuff. And I'm like, you're right. I get to put my own hours, but they are long hours. Yeah. There is a high cost to my family, even to my health. I hate to say it, but sometimes even to my health. So there's a high price for that. Also, you do lose a lot of your freedom, because you have freedom. It's really strange. It's like on the outside, it looks like you have a ton of freedom because you're starting something on your own, but you have a lot gets taken away because you have to be so devoted to it. And so I don't complain though. I love it. And they're just realities that comes with it. But I think the end result and the every day to day is so rewarding. So even though there's a high price, and even though that you don't have as much freedom as you might think, there is just this complete devotion and this beauty that comes of it. And I do joke many times and say it is like my first child. I have 3 children, but this is like my first before the biological children. Right. Ascentium really is like my first child, and it's hard, but it's been really rewarding.
The oldest one, it's probably a teenager right now.
Exactly, it feels that way.
So let's talk a little bit about funding, right? I think funding is one of those things that is so critical for entrepreneurship. And I don't know, I know very, very little about it, but with a few of the people that I've talked to, it seems like it's a really difficult area to navigate. Can you help us understand how the funding works throughout your years of experience? I understand that this may only be applicable to your experience, but at least it's a good example.
I was going to say too, just connecting the bridge from funding to like lessons learned. So other funding opportunities to think about are, if you're in school, whether that's high school, undergrad, or graduate school, there are many opportunities on the funding side and to start a business. When you can pitch, you can do pitch competitions, business pitch competitions. You can get live feedback and also just practice your story, practice how to tell your story.
Yeah.
Also funding side grants. So the way we started Ascentium, yes, we had some investment, but really we had an NSF grant that helped us get started, and joint development agreements, working with once you have an idea, working with a company that would want to see that through and put in some money into making the idea come to life. And so I think those are some ways to get, funding. Specifically, I think on the funding side, bootstrapping, angel investors, really building a strategy where you are going out there and meeting and putting yourself, you have to hear the word no so many times and realize that no just means let me ask it a different way, or no just means let me try to explain it in a different way, because if you just hear no and you turn around, it's not going to work. You got to hear no and say, how do I get to yes? One of my good friends that I've met and worked with over the past couple of years always says, how do we get to yes? And I use that every day. How do we get to yes? When I hear a no, it's like, okay, how do we get to yes? So as far as funding, I would say really the bootstrapping, the angel for sure, but really looking at those grants and opportunities, what's out there. There's the small business and research grants that are available through the NSF, research innovation grants, STTR grants that are available when you're working with the university, and the DoD, the DOE. Lots of the government agencies have grants because they want to support innovation for Team USA and for the local inventors in the country.
Mm-hmm. And can you help us understand, because I know nothing really about this, what is the difference between bootstrapping and angel investors, for example?
Great question. So bootstrapping is where you are putting in your own money, or you are just using your own funds or paying yourself very little. And you're just you're hanging on tight. That's the term bootstrapping. You're strapping your boot tight and you're just trying to be very conservative with the cash and just trying to spend little. So when we started the company, the amount of compensation I was making was tiny. And it was nothing like what I could be making in industry with a master's or a PhD. But it was okay because I knew I had some equity in the company. I knew that it was for a short season. And so that's the bootstrapping side. The angel investor is the type of investor. It's a high net worth individuals or a group of individuals that come together and they invest seed funding, typically in the tens of thousands to low hundreds of thousands, sometimes $1 million, seed money. And so those are typically how you start. Venture capital is where you start to go into the hundreds of millions, and that's a lot more funding. But to start, I would say the bootstrapping and the angel investors, friends and family type thing. That's what you typically see in an angel investor.
Okay. And then you also mentioned having a strategy of maybe how you're going to pursue funding. Do you have any advice as to how to look at coming up with a strategy?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that you have to, and I think you see it, if any of you have seen Shark Tank, the show Shark Tank, someone will go on the show and they'll have an idea and they'll say, I want some funding for my idea to make my idea come true. I need $300,000 or whatever. And then the shark will say, okay, for 30% of your company, I'll give you 300,000. And the other says, for 20% of your company, I'll give you 400,000 and let you have a say in it. Or the one will say, well, I want 90% of your company, or I'm not doing anything. And so I say all those extremes to say, when I talk about an investor strategy, as a co-founder and as an entrepreneur, you need to be comfortable and really understand, what does it mean when you take someone else's money? Do you give up control? How much? How much equity do you keep? How much is it worth? How much are you going to be worth in 5 years, 10 years? Where do you accept the funding and what are the terms? Don't just take money without knowing the terms, and not understanding them. I think that's something that any entrepreneur will tell you, and I'll tell you myself, is that you really have to understand it. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs don't know enough of. I know I certainly didn't, and I've learned a lot over the years.
Right.
And so I think that one of the best things you can do for yourself is to investigate and start finding out what terms are you comfortable with. What is your strategy? Are you going to bootstrap? Are you going to go find angel investors, then venture capital? Do you want to stay a private company? Do you want to be a partnership? What is it that you want to do? And I think that that's really important early on. And then you need to revisit it every so often. It's not necessarily that you're going to have an answer every single, day, or it's going to be, you're not going to have an answer for 10 years, but you can at least be planning for that.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned very lately the topic of your own compensation, right? As an entrepreneur, as a co-founder. And I wonder if you can help us understand like how or what strategies are out there, or maybe what strategies do you use to keep your head above water while you're really, the focus of your work is maybe not having a plentiful salary, but really growing the company?
Yeah, you have to be very future focused, I think, with entrepreneurship, especially if you're in a tech startup. I used to look around sometimes, and this is where it gets dangerous. I would look around to see maybe a friend or someone would invent a gadget or something that was very like consumer, like a water bottle, and they could sell that immediately. And I'm thinking, here I'm trying to build nanocellulose composites that are not going to be ready for 10 years. And I cannot see the fruit of my labor right now, or I'm trying to build a new material, or et cetera. And so you really have to almost keep those blinders on like a horse, like walking through, and not look around too much to see like, why am I not doing why am I not? You have to stay focused and say, okay, I'm on a marathon and there's going to be key wins along the way, but I have to pace myself to know that I'm going to get there. So if you can get a minimal viable product, an MVP out sooner than, a year, 2 years, 5 years, then that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So I think pacing, and then just realizing like, part of being a founder is that there is some compensation for you if it goes well. And that's part of what gives you that desire to keep going. It also is what gives you that, that forward-looking reward to say, okay, I'm working hard now. It's high risk, but the reward is high.
Yeah.
And if you have a high salary now, but aren't doing something like that, then you're like, okay, well, I'm getting my reward now, and my future maybe is not as big as if someone was doing an entrepreneurship role. And that's okay. Not one isn't better than the other. They're just different. And you have to be comfortable with that if you're an entrepreneur.
Thanks for sharing that. I think this is very important to at least have an idea of what it looks like, right? So that you can know and understand what you're getting into before actually committing to it. Today, your title is Chief Development Officer and co-founder of Essentium. And you have another co-founders or many other co-founders, but one of them is your spouse, Blake Teipel, right? What is it like to found a company with your spouse, and how do you guys balance that relationship?
Yeah, always access. When you work with your spouse, there's always access to the other spouse. So I guess that's a plus. But to answer your question, so yeah, it's really, honestly, it's really special. It really is. We both have a high tolerance for risk. So it's almost a good thing, because I think it's allowed us to really thrive in this ecosystem. It's been a really good experience in that we both are very driven and both are willing to give it our all. And because we're both willing to give it our all and we're working towards the same thing, in that respect, it's made it really easy. If he has to work late, or I have to work late, or we have meetings or have travel, we're very understanding and sympathetic about it, and supportive, I should say, not sympathetic, but supportive to each other. Now, the challenge comes, I would be remiss to say that it's easy. It's not easy, especially early on. I think both Blake and I are naturally, what I would say, have personality of wanting to lead and wanting to, and so I think learning to like when to listen, how to become better listeners. Like that's really something that we've both grown in. And then I think just in general, like the dynamics to our family, it means that when we're both working at the same job in the same company, while it's really good in some ways it's hard because we never can turn off, right? We're both always talking about work and stuff. So I think that's one of the challenges, is just that we love, honestly, it is our hobby. We love it so much we don't stop talking about it. So we actually have to like remind ourselves, well, it's okay to take breaks sometimes and, and balance a little bit more. But overall, it's honestly been so amazing. And we got a compliment actually two instances that really stood out to me about comments that people have made about the dynamic that Blake and I have working together. Is a few years back, we wanted to ask someone to be on our board, and he found out that Blake and I were married, and he said, when there is a startup and it's a husband-wife combination, it either goes one of two ways. It goes ridiculously well and it's amazing, or it goes horribly wrong. And it goes horribly wrong more than it goes ridiculously well. And he's like, but I'm optimistic, and that was 6 years ago that we met that person. And it really has been the case that we've been able to work together really well and bring out the best in each other. And I think that's really special. Additionally, we met someone not too long ago, and this person said a similar comment of like, really just encouraged about the way that Blake and I, he saw Blake and I working together and thought that was really special to see the combination, the duo of really understanding each other, but really being all focused on the company. So from that standpoint, it's really neat to have those comments from the outside coming in, because I think on the day-to-day, the grind can get really hard and you're tired, and we have two young children that we are taking care of. And it's like, it's a lot. I'm not going to lie, it's a lot, but it is really rewarding.
Yeah. And so recapping of all the titles and all the hats that you wear, right? Like you have two young children, you are the co-founder of a company, you're also the chief developer officer of that company, you're a daughter, you have your parents as well. Like what is one piece of advice that you have to just, help get through it? I know that it's not easy, and I know that it's more, for me, it's more like an equilibrium where, it's not a balance. I one time heard this from a professor in nuclear chemistry where she said, everybody talks about work-life balance, but it's not really a work-life balance. It's never perfectly balanced. It's an equilibrium. When something takes a little too much, something else has to sacrifice for a little bit, but you're always striving to find that equilibrium.
Oh, that's so good. Definitely. It's the case. I think I've heard people say like, you can have it all, or you can have all things. And I just don't believe that's true. Like something's got to give in order for, if you work more, you sleep less. If you eat more, you're less healthy. If you, if you are in too many meetings, you're not spending time with your kids. Like so really there is no way to balance. It really is that equilibrium. I think that the difference in the wording it makes a lot of sense. For me, I've just come to see what happens when you don't. I mean, there's times if I realize I'm not sleeping enough, then I get sick a lot easier. Or, if I have a lot of deadlines coming up and I don't prioritize time with my kids, then my kids, will say, oh, I'm missing you, or I want to see, and so you realize, wow, I really have to do that. Or even Blake and I, we get so used to working together that we have to make time. Oh, let's go grab dinner, or let's just go grab a Starbucks or something, and it's just finding little ways to do it, but not tricking ourselves to thinking like we're ever going to reach this perfect balance. I think that could set you up for failure. Like, I don't know, at least I think it could. I think that it puts on too much expectation. It's just good to realize that when you're out of an equilibrium from one area, just recenter and figure out, okay, what could I do differently, or what could I give up less to do more of, and vice versa. And just finding that for some seasons, one is going to be higher than another, and it happens. And that's the other thing. You have to be comfortable with seasons, but be watching yourself. Like, you might say, you know, for the longest time I used to say, oh, I'm only going to do this or that or that. And then I never did it. And I realized, oh, it's because I keep saying I'm going to do it and I don't do it. So finally, when you say, okay, I'm going to go to bed at 10, then, okay, 10 at 9:30, I better start getting ready to go to bed at 10. Otherwise I'm not going to do it, you know? And so things like that, where you have to be, again, back to how we start a conversation, proactive and realizing that you can do a lot of things and you can have a lot of fun, but it's impossible to do everything well. Something's got to give. Something's got to give. And I think for Blake and I, that's something we've really realized even in our lives and our careers, is that we want to be really good parents too. And so I think that while yes, we want to be great entrepreneurs, number one thing for us is we want our kids to remember us as, hey, we had really good parents. You know, that to me means more than being remembered as a good entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. You know, I have only one more question, and this is sort of like a fun one. So imagine somebody is coming to visit you in your city, but you're not there, and they're still going to be in Austin. Like, what do you recommend them to do? Maybe top 3 things that you would tell them to do, or places to visit in Austin.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so in Austin, I would highly recommend, honestly, the food scene is so great. There's so many great restaurants. So I would pick your favorite cuisine and look up like the top restaurants in town and go to it. Like, there's just so many good restaurants in town. The foodie scene is good. Food trucks, restaurants, definitely that. And then I would say there's some really good like hikes around. Like, we like to be outdoors, and so like just going around hiking, we like to go into the Canyonlands, Bucklands Canyonlands, and hike with our kids a little bit around. And then third, I would say, well, Blake and I, this is something we like to do. I think you can do it in any city, but I think it's a good way to see city. We like to ride Lime scooters wherever we go someplace. So like a couple of years ago, we went to Austria, and we were in Vienna, and Blake and I were just like riding Lime scooters around, because it's just a good way to see the city. So I would definitely, that's fun in Austin to be able to like ride around and see everything.
Yeah. And what's your favorite restaurant in Austin?
Oh, man. I think right now my favorite restaurant is a restaurant called Abba in downtown. It's kind of downtownish, Abba, but it's really good. So
excellent. I'll check it out next time I'm there.
Very good.
Elisa Teipel, thank you so much for being in the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. Just thank you for doing this great work and inviting me. It's such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Latinx Can. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.